Hold on to this for a moment. A soldier reaches for his blanket at dawn, and instead of softness, it snaps like a sheet of ice. It wasn't a rare moment on the Western Front. It was routine. When most people think about the First World War, they hear the thunder of artillery or picture waves of men charging across no man's land. But for those who lived in the trenches, the most relentless enemy didn't explode, didn't shout, didn't even move. It waited. It seeped. It took hold slowly, patiently, and without mercy. Psst, the cold. By the winter of 1916, the war had stalled into a brutal stalemate, and the trenches of Flanders became frozen corridors of suffering. Soldiers weren't just fighting each other, they were fighting the basic laws of thermodynamics. Heat escaped their bodies faster than they could replace it. Waterlogged trenches turned into icy traps. Supplies failed. Fires meant visibility, and visibility meant death. So the question became brutally simple. How do you stay alive when warmth itself becomes a liability? What followed wasn't written in military manuals. It didn't come from generals or engineers. It came from cold hands, hungry minds, and the instinct to survive. Out of scrap metal, cardboard, and melted wax. Soldiers built one of the most effective survival tools of the war, a compact, improvised heat source, powerful enough to boil water, dry clothing, and keep men alive in conditions designed to kill them. This isn't just a story about ingenuity. It's a masterclass in survival under pressure, and the lessons still hold today. To understand why these heating hacks mattered, you need to grasp what winter in the trenches actually did to the human body. This wasn't clean, dry, cold. It was wet, invasive, and persistent. Trenches were often dug below the water table, meaning soldiers stood for hours in freezing mud that crept into boots and soaked through socks. Once wet, there was no drying out. The body loses heat far faster when it's wet, and in these conditions, that loss becomes catastrophic. First comes numbness, then stiffness, and eventually the slow breakdown of tissue. This is how trench foot set in, a condition so severe that thousands of soldiers required amputations. And it didn't take weeks. In some cases, just days of exposure were enough. Food didn't help much either. Rations froze solid. Drinking water turned to ice. Even sleep became dangerous because lying still allowed body temperature to drop further. Soldiers weren't just uncomfortable, they were locked in a constant battle against hypothermia. The military tried to respond with routine measures, rotating socks, applying oils to the feet, enforcing inspections. These helped, but only slightly. None of them addressed the real issue. What soldiers needed wasn't prevention, it was heat. And heat in a war zone came with deadly consequences. In any survival scenario, fire is one of the most valuable tools. It provides warmth, cooks food, purifies water, and boosts morale. But in the trenches, fire was a double-edged sword. Even the smallest flame could give away a position. Flicker at night could draw sniper fire. Smoke during the day could signal artillery. Soldiers were trapped in a brutal equation. Light a fire and risk being killed, or stay dark and freeze. That tension forced a shift in thinking. Instead of asking how to build a bigger fire, soldiers began asking how to build a smarter one. They needed something contained, efficient, low visibility, and capable of producing steady heat without drawing attention. That's where one of the most ingenious battlefield innovations emerged, the trench candle. At its core, the trench candle was built from nothing more than an empty tin can, corrugated cardboard, and wax or fat. But the brilliance wasn't in the materials, it was in how they were used. Soldiers would roll strips of cardboard into a tight spiral and place it inside the tin. The structure of corrugated cardboard created natural channels that acted like multiple wicks. When melted wax or animal fat was poured in, it soaked into those channels, allowing fuel to rise evenly throughout the structure. When lit, this wasn't a weak candle flame. It became a broad, stable burn surface, more like a miniature stove than a light source. It produced consistent heat, resisted wind, and could burn for hours depending on the fuel available. This design solved multiple problems at once. It minimized visible flame, reduced smoke, and maximized heat output. It was compact enough to carry and simple enough to build under pressure. In survival terms, it hit the ideal balance. Low resource input, high functional return. And perhaps most importantly, it was adaptable. If wax wasn't available, soldiers used animal fat. If cardboard was scarce, they improvised with whatever fibrous material they could find. the principle remained the same. In a modern context, it's easy to forget how dependent we are on supply chains. In the trenches, those chains broke constantly. Soldiers couldn't rely on consistent fuel or equipment. They had to scavenge. Every bit of wax mattered. Soldiers scraped candle remnants, collected residue from packaging, even rendered fat from food scraps. Nothing was wasted. The battlefield became a resource field, and survival depended on how well you could extract value from it. But there was another layer to this: cooperation. Heat wasn't just a personal resource. It became communal. Soldiers pooled materials to build better heaters. They shared fuel. They gathered around these small flames not just for warmth, but for a sense of normalcy. This is a critical survival lesson that often gets overlooked. In extreme conditions, collaboration increases efficiency. One person scavenging alone gathers less than a group working together. One small flame helps one person, but a shared heat source can sustain many. The trench candle was only the beginning. Soldiers refined their understanding of heat and airflow. They began building more advanced systems, early versions of what we now call rocket stoves. Using larger tins, scrap metal, and mud, they created vertical combustion chambers that improved airflow. This design used a basic principle. Hot air rises, and as it rises, it pulls in fresh oxygen from below. This continuous cycle increases combustion efficiency. The result was a hotter, cleaner burn with less smoke, exactly what soldiers needed. These improvised stoves could cook food, heat larger spaces, and do it with minimal fuel. To stabilize and insulate them, soldiers used mud mixed with grass. This acted as a thermal mass, storing heat and releasing it slowly over time. It's the same principle used in modern off-grid heating systems. What's remarkable is that none of this came from formal training. It came from observation, trial and error, and the transfer of practical knowledge. Farmers understood airflow from barns. Workers understood materials. They applied what they knew in a completely different context. Not all soldiers faced the cold in the same way. The structure of their trenches made a huge difference. German forces often built deeper, more fortified dugouts. These provided better insulation and allowed for more permanent heating solutions. Larger stoves could be used with less risk of exposure. British trenches, on the other hand, were often shallower and more temporary. Soldiers had to rely on portable, low-profile solutions like trench candles. Their environment demanded flexibility and speed rather than permanence. This highlights another key survival principle: adapt your strategy to your environment. There is no universal solution. The best tool is the one that fits your specific conditions. There's an uncomfortable truth behind these innovations. While they saved lives in the short term, they carried hidden risks. Burning low-quality fuel in enclosed spaces produces harmful particles. Soldiers didn't know about carbon monoxide or long-term respiratory damage. They prioritized immediate survival, and that was the right call in that moment, but it came at a cost. This is a reality in survival situations. Every decision involves trade-offs. The goal isn't perfection, it's survival. You manage risk, you minimize harm where you can, and you accept that some costs are unavoidable. This isn't just a historical curiosity. Same principles apply right now. In modern conflict zones and disaster areas, people are still building trench candles. When infrastructure fails, people return to fundamentals. Heat, fuel, airflow, insulation, these are timeless concepts. You don't need advanced gear to apply them. You need understanding. If the power grid fails, if fuel becomes scarce, or if you find yourself in an off-grid situation, the ability to create controlled heat from basic materials becomes invaluable. A simple stove built from a tin can boil water, cook food, and provide warmth. That's the real takeaway. Survival isn't about having the best equipment. It's about knowing how to use what you have. At the center of this story is not a device but a mindset. A soldier holding an empty tin didn't see waste, he saw potential. He understood that survival depended on action, not waiting. That moment, taking scraps and turning them into something life-sustaining, is what defines real resilience. It's not strength or endurance alone. It's the ability to think, adapt, and create under pressure. The trench candle wasn't just a tool. It was proof that even in the harshest conditions, people can find solutions. That knowledge didn't disappear with the war, still here waiting to be used. So here's the question that matters. If everything around you stopped working tomorrow, would you know how to adapt? Would you recognize the resources at your feet? If this gave you something practical to think about, something you could actually use, then you're already ahead of most people. Make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who values real knowledge over theory. That's how we keep these lessons alive. Stay sharp, stay prepared, and above all, stay resourceful.